Hello, everybody. Happy Monday. I just wanted to let you know that I was actually rather pleased with the papers that came in. I mean, when you think about it, we've been in class for like 4 days, 5 days, not even. And I saw a lot of great progress. Now that might run counter to like how many of you feel because I did get some emails, which is fine. I totally understand. People worried about their first grade. Well, like I said to at least one person, it is early, very early. So, the best way to learn writing is to really rewrite. I've heard that a long time ago, for a long time. Another phrase is the best writing is rewriting. That is the process you go through. I mean, it's just not to brag, but I did wrote a book once. It's called Legacy of Madness, about the history of mental health in my family and how I discovered it. And you know, there's a certain amount of pride and you have to swallow, and there's humility you have to accept that comes with this. And I even hired on top of the editor that was at the book publishing company, I hired an editor to actually help me out because that's what you do, and this is considered a team process. So, as I mentioned in my previous tapes, I mean, uh, we work together, okay? Um, I added the story and you work to improve it, and that's it. I like the idea. Some of you have actually sent me like rough drafts. That's a good idea. I've kind of been able to help you all along, help you like more specifically. I can't really provide like a full edit when you provide me a rough draft, you know, but I will provide guidance. I mean, that's when somebody emails me something directly saying, "What do you think of this?" Um, So yeah, so I mean, there's that working with me that shows class participation. That's great. So yeah, so there's you know there's still, like I said the other day. I mean, I took a peek at the original some of those stories before I actually edited them, and I felt like there was already some work that needed to be done, but that's fine because it's early, okay? And that's another reason why I give weight to the last couple of assignments. They get Um, essentially, their grades are more weighted than their grades for those last assignments were more weighted than the earlier assignments because the idea is that so many people don't go through life learning journalism style writing. Again, it's a very upside down kind of top down style of writing where the most important thing is first. And in this particular case, what's unique about the individuals you wrote about is what's unique and what comes first. So, and then the details that kind of help support that and boost that theme come second and third and fourth. And then the least important details, which you typically are, one thing I've told people is that the word news comes from the word new. It's the plural of the word new. So what's new is typically is what's first, what's important, okay? What's more important than what happened in the past. There was one story, uh, in fact, where somebody accomplished like this big thing, and you could debate what's really new, actually, and what this person accomplished was like in 2022. So, I mean, it wasn't like 10 years ago, it wasn't 15 years ago, it was, 4 years ago. So, it wasn't that long ago, but still, it would be interesting to know what, interesting to know. That is a huge accomplishment this person had, but it would be interesting to know like how that person rode with that accomplishment because it has been 4 years now. I mean, a lot of things can happen in 4 years. We've seen it to people who are famous one minute and suddenly the next minute they're not famous or they've done something bad or whatever. So we don't know. In this particular case, it appeared that this person still is actually continuing his or her or their success. I don't remember exactly, but let me show you an example. I sent this out yesterday. Now I am taping this on Sunday, so when I say yesterday, I mean I'm talking about as though I'm talking on Monday. Okay, so I mean I sent this out on Sunday. So let me just actually share the screen first. Okay. All right. And I'm sorry, it's right somewhere. Um, desktop. Okay. This came from Sebastian, who was kind enough to let us share this with us. Now look, I mean, and I'm not in any way diminishing what he wrote about it because it was very interesting. But again, you don't have to climb Mount Everest to have an interesting story. In this particular case, Jane Brown, basically Rutgers University graduate, is building a devoted online following through role play. And there's some people who talked about this, developing online followings, things like that. That's interesting. Maybe it's just because I'm 59 years old and I'm out of touch in some ways, but I just think that some of you are like taking that kind of initiative, no matter what level. Maybe that's not uncommon in the, dare I say, Gen Z world or whatever, but I think it's uncommon enough to be something that's unique and written about. So this person basically has been essentially developing role playing, developing ASMR content while also pursuing a master's degree. It's actually supposed to be like this. Sorry, I'm sorry. In communication and public relations. Okay. So basically, now one thing I probably should have made clear is that whenever you have a story about somebody who does something like a job or something like that, what's like the first question? Again, that's probably in your head. I did actually go over this a little bit, but just to reiterate, the first thing that probably goes through your head you want to know about is what exactly do they do? You know? What is specifically, let's get more specific, about those details. Anything, anytime. So that's what you have to think about. And there's really no science to that. There's no math problem solved there. It's just, you have to use your own judgment as a reader. Like, yeah, and that's like why it's actually good. Like I recommended like reading the stories out loud because actually it's supposed to read like almost like having a conversation with somebody, a news story. So when you read them out loud, it's almost like you get that kind of feeling like how it should sound if you're reading out loud. And sometimes you might actually like say like it doesn't sound right, So your natural instincts might say like I gotta change that. Um, and in this particular case, I mean, when you're when you're writing about somebody and what sort of job they do or something like that, I mean, I want to know how special that job is. I want to know like what really makes it special. And usually like the first question, again, I've said this before, that is asked in any kind of story is what? What is so important or why do I care? That sort of thing. So that you have to basically kind of talk about this and what this means and what this is and how she got this devoted online following, etc. And you have to stay consistent with that from top to bottom. I had some people who had a good top where they would have something like this, and maybe they'd talk a little bit about the job they did, which was interesting, that sort of thing. But then they would shift like an entirely different direction. They would suddenly say, Brown also likes to, I would suddenly see something along the lines of like this. Brown also enjoys water polo and hockey or something. And that sort of thing. Well, that's kind of going in a whole different direction. I mean, we're not writing an encyclopedia entry here. In my last video, I showed you awkwardly showed you the string theory that Steve Miller, a professor here, has. You really have to stay on like one line, one focus from the very top to the very bottom of these stories. It's all about answering questions. It's all about basically like I've had people, and actually I've done a little bit of editing this story, which was very well done. I've done a little bit of editing this story, and there was actually a question in this story. I've had people do that in the past, where somebody like asks a question in the story of the writer, and I know that that can be like kind of an interesting writing device of some stories, but I'm not a fan of it. Um, I feel like stories answer questions. They don't ask questions. Okay. And to me, it's a little too cute. Okay. So don't be cute. So just give the news. Okay. So anyway, so this is what we do. We answer the questions. ASMR, short for autonomous sensory meridian response. Very good job here from Sebastian, basically spelling this out. Is often found in video format online and features sound like whispering and tapping and blah, blah, blah. I think it was actually important to basically talk about what this is in this field. Now, what does Brown do? Said she has a massive following in the hundreds of thousands across YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Spotify. There's actually no comma here. Sorry. Standing out in the increasingly competitive space of content creation and artificial intelligence means focusing on atmosphere over sound, she said. Rather than recording isolated trigger noises, she constructs immersive role play scenarios drawn from everyday life, like a doctor's exam, recreating experiences that viewers may find relaxing in the real world. So again, talking more about what she does. Okay. It sounds very technical, very interesting, actually. And then you got a quote, and I'm going to be getting into this a bit today, talking about the use of quotes. Not a fan of long quotes. And I talk, this is something I really kind of address hard in the third assignment, actually. I gave you guys the second assignment, which is the leads assignment, which I'll also be talking about today. But then I also like asked for ideas for the third assignment. The third assignment is where I really get into the whole idea of like the use of direct quotes. Direct quotes, just so you know, should be used sparingly. I did talk about this a little bit, but and they should be like kind of quick. They really only should be used if somebody says something colorful or emotional. Okay. When you have something like this, I saw some of this, like well, somebody would take this, something that's informational, and put it into a quote. And it's a really, people shouldn't have to read a quote that long. It's really when you put quotes around something like that and people talk like in a long, that means people usually talk in a long sentence rather than recording isolated trigger noises. Um, yeah, they can kind of meander. I constructed immersive role play scenarios. They have more words that can be drawn from everyday life, and that could be something. And then you get words like that could be something like, that sort of thing. And you notice how like I'm adding words because that's the way people talk sometimes, is that they kind of like meander and that sort of thing. But rather than do that, it's much better and it's very informational. There's really nothing colorful or anything like that. It's much better to write in in a paraphrase. See all the words I'm cutting out when we paraphrase? See what happens when I'm doing this? There we go. So yeah, I cut out a bunch of words. Probably still is a little bit of a long sentence or something like that. But the same I could do something like this when actually like I'm paraphrasing. I can like basically like create my own sentences, you know. Maybe it's good to get attribution in here, both these places, that sort of thing. You can make shorter sentences, things like that. You have control over your writing when you paraphrase, okay? So yes, please paraphrase before, relying on, I've had people like write like really long direct quotes, okay? Like literally like this. He said, he also said, he also said, I mean, that's not writing. You know what that is? That's stenography, okay? I mean, that would be the easiest thing in the world to do, but it would make it highly unreadable. What you need to do, think of yourself, even though you're not quite there yet. Okay. Think of yourselves as like kind of wannabe special or wannabe professional writers. And your job, as I said before, is to listen, summarize, write, sorry, listen, internalize, write, summarize. And when you do that summarization of what people say, you're actually interpreting what people are saying. Okay. And the paraphrasing essentially is doing that, is taking people's words and putting them in your own words so that you can write them in a way that people understand. You can simplify sentences, you can simplify words, the whole thing. So that's huge. And actually, that's one of the chapters that we have that I asked you to read that and it deals with that. So really got to like paraphrase more than and then rely on direct quotes. Okay. Um, I actually think this is actually a pretty good direct quote because it's short, first of all, but that's how my audience recognizes me as a creator. Shows a little bit of emotion, I would say. It's kind of borderline to be honest with you, but it is good to have like some direct. I mean, it could also be informational, which doesn't equal. It could go either way, but Usually the best quotes are something like this. That's how my audience recognizes me a creator as a creator, and it really excites me. You know, when you show the kind of human emotion, I mean, it can actually like help humanize the story by having a direct quote like this, okay? But it's much better when you actually have it like shorter and used sparingly like this. This story actually like, is very well written because producing the atmosphere is not easy, she said. Each video, because a lot of it is relying on paraphrasing, okay? Each video requires approximately 5 hours from start to finish. It goes through the whole different litany of different things she does, which is excellent. When I'm out in public, I'm thinking about certain sounds. That's like a good quote because actually it shows some color and even some emotion. I'm tapping on things, that sort of thing. Okay. More about what she does. Um, oh, I'm sorry. This is actually, then we get into a little bit of the why she does it. Well, she's a longtime sufferer of anxiety and sleep difficulties. So that's why she gravitated toward this. She said her guiding philosophy is to create content that you yourself would want to watch. Okay. And, also like maybe some of the hurdles she went over to, but she climbed over, like self-doubt came in the way, that sort of thing. Okay. But then when she went through the process, she actually like got gained confidence. Now it's good to maybe at the end of the story kind of look to the future. So she's managing both pursuits and busy with a busy schedule. That's being a student and everything else, and so on and so forth. Okay, so yeah, so that was an example of a good story. Okay, all right. Okay, so what do we have coming up? Yes, I wrote notes to myself. Again, this is actually actually, I guess we could actually go into the student view so you can see what, makes sense. View as a student. Okay, so like I said, it's usually best to go show by type, and then we can look at like what's due. Okay, so we had the first assignment that was due. One thing I want to talk about that, by the way, before I get into the what's due. There were a few people who did not do the assignment. Okay, so that's not totally unusual to have a couple people don't do their assignment. I was a little surprised because one person actually was one of the people who wrote to me. I think just about everybody has written to me and told me your email, that sort of thing, except for two people. So I thank you everybody for that. One of the people who wrote to me didn't turn in their assignment, so I was a little surprised by that. And actually, now as I talk on Sunday, it's past that 24-hour window I gave. You might remember that if, I mean, new journalism again is about deadlines. If you don't turn it in on time, you basically lose credibility, you'll lose to the other outlet. I mean, the journalism is a bit of a race, you have to have that, and you have to beat people, that sort of thing, without sacrificing quality or accuracy, obviously. But um, you know, in the old days, if you didn't do it, if you didn't do things on time, then you held up the production trucks and the distribution trucks, and they would actually go out and like be like, "What the hell is going on here? Why did this? Why don't these reporters get these things done on time?" It took basically held up the whole printing process, the whole thing. So it's a big deal when you don't turn things in. And also it shows lack of responsibility. So yes, I did have three people, and like I said, I do give like a bit of a grace period. If you turn it in within 24 hours of the due date and time, which is 11:59 on Friday. So if you turn it in by 11:59 on Saturday, I will give you credit for the assignment, but your final grade will be a grade lower. Well, now as I sit here on Sunday, it's beyond that 24 hours. And if it's beyond that 24 hours, it's an F. Okay. So you got to do your stuff. I made the effort of actually reaching out to the people who didn't turn their assignments, and I've heard nothing from them. Well, that's too bad. That's a shame. And if you want to talk about class participation in this class, that's poor class participation. Okay. Um, so if you're out there and you're listening to this, please make note of this, that perhaps we can work out some sort of a deal, but maybe you had something happen in your life. Let me know, okay? But that is the rule. Right as it stands right now, it's an F. Okay. Um, Now, one thing I always run into this too, by the way. I had a couple people. It's fine, totally fine. When they actually did the rewrites already for this, I would say it's a little fast. So, I mean, I just literally like sent people these stories yesterday. So, I mean, I like to give people time to work on these things, but that's fine. If you get it and you get it done right, fine. Um, but just know they probably won't sit down and look at it and read it until like later in the week. So, um, I actually post a separate entry for the rewrite. Okay, so this is it, right? So basically, you just submit it to this one, okay? And then again, that same example that I keep in here is here. All right, so that's where you submit it, okay? So please put your rewrites in here. Remember that rewrite is due now a little less than a week from today. It's actually due on Friday at 11:59, the same time as the second assignment. The worksheets are due, okay? It's the only time I think we actually have that kind of overlap. All right. So, but things start out quickly in this class, so. Um, all right, so yeah, so that's what's due. Actually, that's not true, actually. We do have overlap. But anyway, I'll get to that. So yeah, so please rewrite. I did have 10, and there were no A's in this class. That's fine. I mean, there was I can't expect that. I've real that is one of the problems with like having I mean, I try to do what I can in the summer class, but it's such a condensed time period that you have to really move quickly. I'm able to give my fall and my spring semester class or students like more time at the beginning to learn the writing, but before they actually like get a grade for it. So, but I've basically kind of ended up with the same results because I try to move as quickly as possible and getting work and reaching out to everybody who needs help. I do again offer office hours on Zoom, that sort of thing. So, um, but yeah, there were no A's. In fact, there were no B pluses either. The highest grade was a B. There were 10 C's, C pluses, and B's. So I would fully expect those 10 people to rewrite their assignment for a higher grade. If you don't, that's not good class participation. I have seen lots of people write C's and wrote then suddenly turned around wrote an A, you know. And you know what they get? They get in their final in their grade for that assignment an A. Your rewrite grade replaces your first draft grade, okay? And like I said, I don't give a lower grade on your rewrite. The worst thing I do is if you don't improve um, on the rewrite, then I give basically the same grade. That's it. Okay, so, and I probably reach out to you and find out, hey, what the heck happened here. Um, so that's how that works. Now, there were 7 people who got R's. Now that means you have to rewrite it. Okay. If you don't rewrite, when I say have to, that means I mean, you don't necessarily have to, but if you don't rewrite it, you get an F. Okay. You don't get a D, you get an F. Okay. So, Um, again, I'll be looking on Saturday morning to see if those 7 people got the R's, rewrote or not. I've seen plenty of people. You should not feel defeated about this, okay? I've seen plenty of people go from an R to an A in just one full swoop. Sometimes actually, I've seen that happen more often when than somebody who actually got like a letter grade. It's almost like they're starting from scratch and they get like a whole lesson in one paper through my criticism or something like that. And then suddenly they're able to turn around and get an A. So don't be shocked if you suddenly see yourself like go from an R to an A. Okay. It's happened plenty of times before. Okay. So please rewrite those things. Okay. All right. So I already talked about this. This is also due, like I said, on Friday. Okay. It's the worksheets. It comes out of here. Some people said they had a hard time actually connecting here. Let me just check to see. I gave essentially what is like something that basically talks about the difference again between the headline and a lead. And let me just go here. Um, this kind of help backs up what I talk about. Sections 9.0 and 9.6. Let me get myself out of the way here. Um, a headline is a heading consisting of words and phrases. Basically, I was trying to show a differentiation. Please do not write a headline for these leads, okay? Write a lead, a full sentence. Headline, because a headline is a heading consisting of words and phrases falling above the story in a newspaper, blah, 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 radio headline. Headline's role is to generate audience engagement by catching their attention. So it basically serves almost a completely different purpose from the actual story itself. The story itself is supposed to inform you, you know, interest you, the whole thing. This is actually intended to grab your attention. Okay. A lead is the first paragraph of the story. After the headline is the most informative and impactful part of the story. Its role is to lead the audience into the story's main body. Okay. The headline may have an element of surprise or awe aimed at the generating the reader's interest. Okay. So that's what it does. Okay. Then the other part was 9.6. So let me go to 9.6, where I think they're a little clearer in what they describe. Okay. It's 9.8. Okay, hold on. I'm sorry. Yeah. Um, Writing a headline involves both the literary and technical experts. Font size, blah, blah, blah. Basically you worry about the size of the headline, the selection of words. Okay, so they basically see how they talk about it. It's almost like this is what the designers of the page do. They worry about like the space that's there. Okay. Um, right. And the best way to get attention, actually, let me just see one thing here. Okay. Yeah. You basically, it goes into the whole idea of like, it cuts out like words that would be typically used in a full sentence that are not like the word the, for instance, that would be used in a full sentence, but not in a headline. The best way to write an attention-grabbing headline is to understand the story fully. Thus, having got a good idea for the story, the sub-editor is able to reflect it correctly the headline. Okay. But again, the whole idea is to kind of grab your attention with like fewer words, okay, and sharper words, perhaps. Okay. All right. So that's and again, like I said, I like to go from like macro to micro, kind of like take like the larger story first, try to work with you on that, and then go to the macro. Go maybe work on certain elements of the story, like the lead, and kind of zone in on that because that's the most important part of the story. Okay. All right. So what else we got to do here, and what else do I need to talk to you about? Let's see. Over the story ideas for third time, second summit. Go over grading. And I'll go over the grading in a bit. Go over where I talked about the go. Okay. Go. Going over the. Okay. So let's see here. Now the third assignment, we're already talking about that already. What the heck? So yeah, I talked about this a little bit on Friday, just so you would know. But really, actually, now is when we should actually more directly address it. And again, like being a reporter, being a journalist is also, again, as I mentioned, being a self-manager, come up with their own ideas, going out there and being on your own. So you have to be like almost like your self-editor nowadays. There's been a lot of like editing staffs have been cut, so you have to come up with your own ideas. So that's part of what goes on here. And also like actually like also being involved in the class is also part of what goes on here. What I'm asking people to do is to be a self-starter, independent, come up with their own ideas. And again, remember there's five. Just basically put them on a Microsoft Word doc and submit it to this, okay? Keep the idea simple, no major investigations. Like I'm gonna go undercover at the cafeteria. I've had people like when the Broward Commons was a cafeteria on College Avenue when I was around, I had people say that I'm gonna go out and find out why, and I'm not kidding. I had this is not a joke. I had this idea from people several times, okay? Probably more than 10. They wanted to find out why the hamburgers caused people to go to the bathroom. Yeah. And what's funny is that we used to wonder the same thing when I went to school at Rutgers 40 years ago. So anyway, so I was like, look, you're not gonna like go behind the counter at Broward Commons or wherever the dining halls are now, Tillett into Livingston, and or now they guess they call it the atrium. Not gonna go behind the counter and put on like the net or something like that and like disguise yourself. There's no freaking like Geraldo Rivera like major undercover like investigative reporting we do here. This is very much an introductory level course. Before you get into the whole like I'm going undercover with the camera thing, you got to learn how to write, okay? And you gotta learn how to report in a very simplistic way, okay? So I just want simple ideas, okay? And typically what I do is I like stories that like might be like a reaction to something that's going on. I and it should be like Rutgers related, okay? It has to be Rutgers related. I said that. So just maybe I know you guys are like away from Rutgers pretty much. Maybe not all of you, but it is summer. You're working online, the whole thing. Well, okay. But you probably do go to the school perhaps like some part of the year, so you probably know about things that are going on or whatever. Maybe there's something else that's going on that's like involves online stuff, or maybe like something generally that's involves the bureaucracy of Rutgers, that sort of thing that you could write about, or you could offer a suggestion. But often the best stories are the ones where this you have students reacting to something that's going on. I'm not asking for like a breaking news story here because there's really not a lot of breaking news stories going on, but it's good to like maybe kind of shine a light on something, maybe even particularly a problem that's going on campus. There is one topic I did actually go through with it one time, and I almost kind of regret doing it because I feel like it's such a topic that like I don't really want to dabble in it because I know there's a lot of passionate views on all sides of this issue, and it's the conflicts in the Middle East. Okay, um, so I mean we have Iran and we have what's going on in Gaza and that sort of thing. So it's in Lebanon. Um, so let's please steer clear of those ideas. Okay. Um, So anyway, it also might be a little bit hard because the whole like what I'm going to ultimately ask you guys to do, okay, and I'm going to ask people to actually um, submit their viewpoints to the discussion point, okay, and that would be a tough one to like have people discuss those issues um, and put their name on it, okay. I want you guys to learn to write and get and report and get people's names because adding the name to an opinion or something like that gives it credibility. It means that person's willing to like take a risk and like and feels that they're true to their values and they're speaking truths and they're not hiding behind something. There is anonymous reporting in journalism. I get it, and some of it's very useful. There is actually I could talk about that right now actually because that is something that we do talk about. There's what they call on the record and there's off the record. Okay. Now, when you go on the record, that means they basically are allowing whatever you're saying to be printed. Okay. That's divided into several areas too. Okay. There's without attribution or background or anonymous. And that's when you have the same old situation where you have a source to close to something somebody said. Okay. Maybe something stuff you might see like in it. Yes, you see them a lot in like the National Enquirer and those tabloid papers, stuff like that, that like report about celebrities. But you also see it in TMZ. But you also see it like in like, in the Washington Post and New York Times, that sort of thing. I mean, I've been reading a lot about like the stuff that's said about apparently it was a story in the New York Times about JD Vance, the vice president, and now Trump's has expressed some dissatisfaction with it, but it was all anonymous sourcing. Don't think that for a minute anybody's like has the courage to actually like, talk about something and get Trump upset. So yeah, so there's that. So that can be useful, especially that's not something we need to do in this class though, because we're really not dealing with controversial things. Okay, so I did have one student who actually did express concerns about that, about one particular story. I allowed it to happen only because I mean it's not being printed and that sort of thing, but it was a very interesting story, and I thought it was actually good to actually um, write about it, and the person felt passionate about it. So then there's off the record where you basically, you know, you're given information, but you are actually not allowed to use it. Now, why the heck would you even have that if you're not allowed to use it? You know, and I used to wonder that myself. Well, actually, off the record reporting can be very useful. And I always point to what happened in like 50 years ago with the Watergate scandal. If you haven't heard about it, it was the scandal that brought down President Richard Nixon, the 37th president of the United States. And he had people in his campaign who broke into a hotel called the Watergate. They were caught, and they they I'm being mocked. Um, oh, here's my dog. Um, anyway, my daughter's making fun of me. She's gonna be a Rutgers student, by the way. This fall, she's transferring. Anyway, um, off the record. Anyway, so they what they did was they would go out and get information from people who would not put their name or didn't want to print it at all. So like, well, what the heck was that? And this was what the Washington Post was doing. And when they found information about it, the reporters were Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. And they went out and found this information. And what they would do is they got a lot of information that was anonymous without attribution, but they were allowed to print it. But they also got information that was off the record. So what they did was they took that information and went to somebody else who confirmed it on the record. So they at least gave them knowledge, a knowledge base. So they had that information with them. All they needed to do was actually just go somewhere else. I mean, it just gave them information they wouldn't have known otherwise. So, all right. Anyway, so yeah, no major undercover investigations. Just basically give me like stuff that, let's do Thursday. So what I do is on my Friday lecture, I basically, that's when I post the third assignment. The third assignment will be based on the I'm sorry, it will be the idea will be whatever I choose, and whoever actually picks, again, I said this last week, but whoever actually like has that idea, um and it could be an overlap, could be several people have that idea. Whoever has that idea will get extra credit, which means you'll get a half a grade higher on assignment. Okay. Um, and let me just make sure of one thing here. Okay. Um, okay. So anyway, what you're going to do is actually just, I'm going to explain this when I actually assign the story, but one thing what we're going to do here is I've had a problem with AI in the past. And yeah, I know. I mean, I kind of run into a problem on the very first assignment. You could have made, well, I know you could have made up those people. Some people could have made up those people. Well, we'll just kind of like give you the benefit of the doubt on that one. But I have had a problem with AI on this other story. Um, so what I'm going to do is, and this is going to be mandatory, people are going to have to basically, once I pick the idea, and it's probably going to be one where students react to, you're going to have to actually I'm going to put up a discussion point. You're going to have to you're going to have to put your opinion. You're going to have to put on both hats. You're going to put on your hat as a source and your hat as a reporter. So what you're going to do is you're going to express your opinion on the discussion point, okay? And then so that other students can use those opinions for their story, okay? One thing you can't do is quote yourself. I've always had that question. I've seen people actually quote themselves. Don't do that, okay? The reason why I do this, I wanted a controlled environment where it's not where people don't stick it into Grammarly and say, please turn into a story. I'm sorry, I've had that issue before, and I can't allow that as much as possible to happen, okay? So once I'll talk more about that on Friday. Okay. All right. So yeah, so that's how that's going to work. All right. Oh, shit. Hold on one second. Sorry. Shouldn't curse, right? Let me just get set up here. Um, assignments. Okay, view a student. All right. All right. Okay. So let's go back to I'm sorry. I'm sorry for holding things up here. I know these are not the most watchable things on the planet. I wish I could like do more fun and games on these things. And I am also the world's worst toggler. Here I am. Duh. Okay. There we go. Okay. So that's what's due. Um, like I said, on Friday, you're going to see a new assignment that's going to pop up. It's going to be the third assignment. And then you're going to see another entry, another new entry. It's going to be the rewrite for the writing leads worksheets. Okay. All right. Um, let's just go through my little list here. Attribution. Okay. Oh, one other thing I want to talk about, and I'm going to talk about take. It's in the book reading. Um, oh, I also want to talk about the grading again. Okay. So let me actually go out of the let me go to the I'm sorry, the modules where I keep that rubric that I talked about, rubric and grading. Okay, so now I can talk about this a little bit more and so that it's understandable. So, I didn't feel like we had got to the point of punishable, publishable and understandable. When I say understandable again, that means I can not, it's not like you're writing in an illiterate way. You're writing in a way that's like, where I don't understand the focus, where I understand completely. I don't understand like what the story means from the top to the bottom. If you've got a B, you're on the way there, okay? But what it means is that it basically needed like some editing and some like to make it more accurate, a little more clear, a little more focused. Okay, maybe it needed like more attribution, which I'll speak about in a minute, to basically show that it came from someplace, so it needed more credibility, that sort of thing. It needed more, okay? And then B is more of that, okay? So if you got a B, you're basically meant that like the story was typically at least organized well. It was clear, okay, to a point, and it definitely has to be accurate, okay. It just probably needed more, like, probably maybe a little more substance. Usually needs a little more of like clarity, perhaps. Um, and and like I said, it probably need to be better sourced with attribution, that sort of thing, which um because I would have people who would kind of do like their own riff where they would basically do like their own commentary within the story or something like that. And you can't put your own commentary into a story. You can't. I talk about, you know, um, reporting being like almost like narration or something like that, but it's not actually a commentary reading. Okay. It's not like you're giving like a public editorial or something like that. Okay. I know people are trying to guide people. They also would do stuff like I saw people actually like insert themselves into the story. And again, we only do third person in this class. Okay. There were, like I said, there were a bunch of like C pluses, C's. And that usually like I'll tell you how that usually like will happen. Was that's usually like when what slips past the organization line, and it would be something along the lines of Tom Davis is a mental health journalist, right? I saw this is a very common thing that happens a lot. So that'd be, I mean, the lead would be better than that. Okay. Yeah, as a mental journalist, that makes sense. Oh, okay. I left out the health. Yeah, you're mental. Okay. But then I would see back when he was five. Okay. All right. So when I was five, that was 1972. Okay. So Tom Davis, a mental health journalist, 2026. Tom Davis, five, 1972. That's a pretty big freaking gap. So, okay, in your case, it was more like 15, 20 years, okay? But in my case, it would be freaking, it was still, so that was still too long, okay? So anyway, man, you gotta like fill in the blanks here. What's in the middle here? What happened in between, you know? I would see that often. And then a lot of times I would see this down like toward the bottom. I would say today he is still producing stories. Well, why is this down on the bottom? You know, this helps back up what we wrote at the top. This is what's new. This should be here. Okay. Stories for best review, blah blah. Let's talk about today. What's new is what's news, and that should be first. So that was actually a common C, where you actually had like the substance of the story. You had like basically what they were, what this person was doing, what they're about, but it was actually typical like buried down in the story. And we would go back to 19, or we go back in your case, we go back to 2005 or 2010 more like it, you know. Okay, so 2010 is not now. And like I said, even like you could even say 2022 is actually a little too far ago. Okay. Um, so that was like essentially the C plus C. And then then like I said, there were a number of stories where maybe like it wasn't like everything wasn't fully addressed, or like it would just totally shift direction, change direction, and there just wasn't enough of anything. So that fell into our territory. Okay. All right. Um, all righty. There was one other thing I wanted to talk about. Go over ideas for Um, oh yeah, okay. So one of the chapters I talk about here is my is that and I'm going to talk about this first because because it's something I addressed in the story, and I talked about this. I said that like maybe the story wasn't well story. I actually didn't really grade down. I really didn't like grade people down. I didn't actually like knock off points. I use that as a metaphor, okay, because I don't really do points, okay? But I would knock people down a bit because I wouldn't knock people down on a grade because they wasn't well attributed unless they got into like their own personal commentary on a story. I had people who would like describe things that were happening at Rutgers that they would believe would be like everybody would know or something like that. And when they were, but what they were actually doing was kind of like their own personal opinion. So, um, give me one second here. Oh my goodness, Mike. Wow. Hey, you want to see my kid's new cat? Um, yeah, isn't that cute? I just found this. You can actually like see some family business going on right here. Unbelievably snuggly. Unbelievable. Bruiser, look at the kitty. Oh my goodness, they're so cute. Look at those kittens. All right, everybody, I want everybody to look at those kittens. Okay, they're cute. Okay. I don't know if you like cats or not. Anyway. Oh, here's my doggy. Hi, Bruiser. You're a good doggy. You're the best doggy. Yeah, you're the best doggy. Anyway, I'm sorry. So anyway, attribution. Hey man, these things go on a long time. I gotta do something. All right. So anyway, what was I gonna say? Okay. Well, we'll take it back by that. My actually son, he just graduated Boston University. He's going to Rutgers, actually Rutgers Law School this fall semester. His cat actually ran away. It's been really hard. He has a live-in girlfriend. She's taking it really hard. Um, so this is actually really good news, and I don't know, it's actually a little bit tearful because been going through a lot. So anyway, um, all right, so attribution. All right, so what I did do though is I tried the attribution is really a learn best by doing. You probably heard that term before, learn by doing. And so what I do is I typically do on this very first time is I show people like where we attribute information to a source. Now here's the thing, okay? You guys are used to footnoting and sourcing material and doing it a way where you put like notes on the bottom of a page when you do like a book report or whatever. Journalism has sourcing too, but it's not done the same way. It's actually done very much like I said, like a conversational kind of way. And it's done through attribution, which is he said, she said, they said, um, and or last name and said, or full name and said, or whatever. Okay. So that's how you basically source material. And how it's done is it's kind of woven into the story, like he said, she said, that sort of thing. You might have seen actually if I show you the I don't have it up here anymore, but I had the story from earlier. You can see that was actually like it was a he said, there was a she said that was kind of woven into the story to kind of source the material. And what that does is, so it's he said, she said, they said, the pronoun and said, and then like maybe the name and said, okay. All right. So that is done. It's kind of woven into the story. Usually, I would say it's usually done at least once per paragraph. And the idea again is to kind of give people an idea that this came from somewhere. And just like any other, you know, writing you would do for any other class. Only difference there is again is that you actually weave this into. So what you typically do is you write, you can put it at the beginning of the sentence, you can put it at the end of the sentence. I like to if there's like if there's a name of somebody, and especially like particularly like a long name or something like that, I think that goes best at the end of the sentence because it's maybe the first things first in a news story. The first thing they have to read should be the easiest thing they have to read. Okay. And so maybe put that at the end of the sentence, especially when you have to like identify somebody's title, which is also what you should do when you attribute, is that when you identify a person for your story, their opinion, and whatever that third assignment is going to be, okay, you should actually put Rutgers student blah 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 said. You should identify who they are because that's important. It actually gives the story credibility. The fact that let's say I don't want to say this is going to be the story, but let's say it's a story about I don't know, the food at Rutgers, okay? I'll pick that one because it's not really an issue during the summer. But anyway, all right, so you want to like, well, who has more credibility than the Rutgers students, the ones who eat them, they eat the food. So that's why it's important to identify pe who people are, okay? When do you attribute? Okay, so when you attribute when there's an opinion that's stated, okay? And the reporter herself should give them his, her, or their opinion. Okay. But you give other people's opinions in the story. So then that's when you attribute. Also, little known facts or not widely known facts. Indisputable the facts that could be in dispute. Could be things that are said or done or whatever that like or known by maybe only a few people. Maybe say things that are said behind closed doors or something like that. Um, that sort of thing. So that a little known facts like something along the lines of like Biden was the oldest president in history. Okay. That's something that actually was actually well known. Okay. And it was not in dispute. So that does not need attribution. Okay. If you did something like this, Biden was the oldest president and unfortunately is no longer president. That needs attribution. Okay. All right. Um, here's something actually. I'm a big New York Knicks fan. Go Knicks. They're going to be playing in the finals for the first time since 1999 against the same team that kicked their butts last time. So I was around for that. Anyway, not everybody knows some things that are going on involving the Knicks right now. Like one of their best players, Mitchell Robinson, injured his finger and will play. Now, this is something that not everybody has heard about or says, or not everybody has like. He actually, I think he just came out about it. Just came out of. He actually got a little bit of a cryptic message. Um, hang on, my brother's getting back surgery. He had a cryptic message on his Facebook page. It was about what he did. So, but what we've been hearing is that he will play. Okay. In the series. So this is a little known fact. Not everybody knows unless you talk to people who know Mitch Robinson or Mitch Robinson himself. So this needs um attribution. So maybe something along the lines of the team said or something like that. Okay. All right. So that's how that works. All right. And there's the cat again. All right. So let's go to the chapters wherever they went. There we go. All right. So I let's go a little bit back to just as a reminder, actually, to chapter 9. You know, I had to basically talk to a few people about this, about they felt like they had like the information that was important in their story, and I had to explain to them that why it needed to be improved because it was buried. Let me just reiterate what chapter 9.1 talks about. That is, again, the inverted pyramid, that the most important stuff actually happens at the top of the story. And that's why that section is fat, or I should say, like wide. Okay. And then as you go down in the story, you identify the lesser important points. And like as I said, sometimes you might have like points that are like evenly like of equal importance. So you just, basically you might go down this this path here, and it's just, you know, it just doesn't necessarily, as it doesn't get less important, but that's typically the process it goes. It goes from the most important part of the story, which is how the story is summarized, to the least. Okay. All right. So remember that, please. Okay. All right. And they talk about other, really ignore the stuff about hourglass style, focus style. It's the same damn thing. Okay. Um, all right. I talked a bit about that, transitions. We'll talk more about that actually when you do your third assignment. All right. And actually, like when I actually pick that next assignment. Okay. All right. So let's go to chapters 7. So this is actually about leads, which we've talked a bit about already. Okay, but again, this will be helpful for the assignment that's due on Friday. So a story, whether fiction or nonfiction, um, has to begin somewhere. The opening of a story needs to grab people's attention and hold it. The rest has to flow logically to a conclusion. So again, like really, like I like the actually one activity I typically do when I'm actually in class in the classroom in fall and spring is I have everybody write like an advertising jingle to maybe something that like topic at hand. And there's actually really kind of a, I hate to say it, but I mean, there's actually kind of a close relationship. I don't know if anybody's ever seen Mad Men. There's actually kind of a close relationship between the advertising world and in fact, then sometimes they fall under the same category of skill, and that is like public relations and that sort of thing, and advertising. And you're basically trying to sell an idea when you're doing a story, just like you're trying to sell a product. So having something catchy and that sort of thing, usually using the substance over the style, is what grabs the reader's attention and gets them to read. Okay. So that's another reason why leads are so important. Okay. Identifying the central point, it can come from all different sources, this sort of thing. That's what this book tries to identify here. Um, you know, just from talking to people, you can get the central idea. You could use it, there's like primary sources, there's secondary sources, there's websites, all sorts of places where you get this sort of information. In our case, we're just going to get information from other people. Leads basically, and the basic questions that kind of, leads. I talk about how the body of a story essentially answers the who, what, where, why, when questions. Well, the lead tries to answer those questions too, but it can't answer all of them, but it tries to answer as much as possible. And sometimes they're more focused on like one of these questions than others. Like sometimes it's a story is about the who, and the story you just did was about the who, the person you're writing about. Ukrainian President Zelensky said Sunday the siege, the port of blah blah blah, will go down in history for what he said were war crimes committed by Russian troops. Okay, it's pretty stunning and heavy lead. Sometimes it's about the what, and unfortunately, this is a mass shooting that happened at a Buffalo grocery store. Sometimes it's about the when, it's about this hurricane and when it's going to hit. It's about the where and like, and actually, now they're really going with the grisly details here, but I would say that sometimes it's just when you talk about where it could be like a traffic accident and like how that might affect people and like how they're driving to work, that sort of thing. The why, sometimes there's stories that act as like explainers that basically when we learn maybe like why certain things are happening. Like we found out recently like why Trump went to war with Iran. It was actually like not what everybody was saying it was. It was not necessarily about finding uranium, um, that sort of thing. Okay. Um, All right. So, all right. Let me just go through here. There was actually another section, I'm sorry, that I meant to go to. Okay. So here's where they show essentially like why the difference between a headline and a lead, okay? So yeah, that's how outdated this book is. Impeached once again, okay? So look at this headline right here. Basically like there's so much missing from here, you know, but you know, my God, how many times has somebody been impeached? Not actually not as often as you think. Twice for Trump, once for Clinton, and once for Andrew Johnson, not Nixon. So four times as a president in history has been actually, and then there's been 47 presidential, well, two people over who came back twice, but 47 presidencies. So anyway, this is so it's not that common. So but basically it's like a headline grabber, it's a grab attention. That's the point of it, is not necessarily to provide good writing, okay? The lead is a full sentence. And then again, active voice. President Trump was impeached by the House the second time, charged with incitement of insurrection over a deadly mob siege. Sometimes we want to try to avoid like going to an extra clause or not, but in that particular case, where it's something earth-shattering as that, you know, um, you want to have something that actually, basically says as much as possible and shows how unique and crazy this whole thing is. Sometimes people like to announce things, and like I warn people, like I have people basically say in their stories, what makes so and so unique? What makes so and so unique? What makes so and so unique? You don't have to announce something that's unique. And like what I like to tell people is that there's actually a technique that's called this. It's when you're in a news story, you show, don't tell. People don't like to be told things, okay? They like to think things, okay? So when you tell somebody it's unique, it's like almost placing a judgment on something, and they may even disagree with it, okay? You don't have to like slam somebody over the head and tell them like what's unique or something like that. You have to show them, and that means you have to work a little bit harder without having to tell them it's unique. You have to actually show them that it's unique, and basically by doing that, it becomes more convincing than being told that. Okay, you have to show them the details. So like this particular case is in the most significant court case dealing with money and politics since 1976. It's not necessary to say that. It's a pretty freaking big thing that's happening here. It's a sweeping new federal law limiting political contributions, and also found parts of the law unconstitutional. Okay, basically, all right. So yeah, so that's like, that's almost like breaking news. There's no like need to kind of slow down the story with some sort of huge introductory clause. Please avoid those in those leads you're going to be writing. I often have that in those leads. Okay. Be concise as possible. Two women stole a purse, containing $50 from a shopper in a local supermarket on Tuesday. Be precise and exact as possible. Okay. See, like long writing just basically comes blah, 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 boring, 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 basically just get right to the point. Okay, be specific. The cost of living rose 2.8% last month, a record high. Okay, just straight to the point. We don't need all these names. Neil Schuster, blah, 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 this guy, blah, blah, blah. That just slows things down and makes things boring. Be exact, noun, verb, noun, verb. Think of your lead as a noun and a verb. Okay. All right, so that's the leads. Now the quotations and attributions. Okay. So yeah, I've talked about this already a bit. Um, and I guess just to kind of, like I said, the reading is really meant to kind of reinforce what I talk about. Okay. Now you can see like here's the deal. Okay. Now what they do here is they talk about how reporters can incorporate quotations into the stories three different ways: direct, indirect, or partial. And that's partial is another one. I saw that in some stories. Should probably try to avoid partial quotes. That's like where you basically have in the middle of the sentence the two quotation marks. It can make the story kind of choppy and hard to read. Okay, suddenly you're reading the story and you're moving along, and suddenly bang, you're kind of nailed with a quotation mark, which means you have to kind of read it a little bit differently. Like oh, this is going to be something colorful and emotional that's coming up. You have to almost like stop yourself. And so in a lot of cases, it wasn't. Okay. So readers don't like that. It makes things kind of jumpy. Okay, just write more of a paraphrase style and use quotes sparingly as a way to, provide color and emotion. Okay. Um, Direct quotations present a source's exact words and consequently are placed with quotation marks, blah, blah, blah. Now, this is an example of direct quotation that's way too damn long, okay? Indirect quotation is just basically a paraphrase, same thing. Journalists should be dealing with ideas of social and economic political nature. There's too much of a trade school atmosphere in journalism today. One spends too much time. That should be paraphrased, okay? It's way too long. We do not need to actually quote every damn thing they say. So we just say Ambrose said journalists should deal with ideas, not mechanical techniques. See how much better and easier that is to read than this long damn quote? Don't do this, okay? When to use direct quotations. Reporters use direct quotations when their sources say something important or controversial. It's another one. It's not just colorful or emotional, but it could be controversial. Or state their ideas in a colorful manner. The best quotations are often short and full of emotion. A story about a herpetologist includes this quotation. I've caught over 1,000 rattlesnakes in Nevada and I liked every one. I can't say the same for everyone I've met. Ha ha ha. See, 22 years, 22 words. The writer has captured and conveyed to the audience what this man enjoys about his work. Okay. All right. There are so much a part of news stories that they may think that a story is incomplete without them, but journalists who merely decorate stories with quotations are not using them effectively. So basically, if you have just a lot of quotations in there, it's boring and it's long and it's hard to read. Okay. You can see it right here. There is an equation I use that works in the basketball court on the playing field in business and like Coleman said, and that is the problem. It's just like, when people read a quote, they actually oftentimes skip over a quote when they're reading. They almost feel like it almost signifies to people that it's actually not the most important part of the story that needs to be read. Okay. So they often skip over them. So that's why he shouldn't do them. Okay. So often. Okay. All right. This is attribution. Okay. So this again is more about the same, statements that require attribution. Reporters need not attribute undisputed facts. It's another way of saying like, not well-known facts, as I said. I compared that to little-known facts, such as World War II ended in 1945, that Boston, Massachusetts, and three people died in a given accident. Nor must they attribute things as witness. I would disagree with this because not everybody knows that three people died in a given accident. But they must attribute facts that are not common knowledge, statements about controversial issues, statements of opinion, that sort of thing. Okay. So we did provide like some examples of that. And that's the end of that. Okay. And that's the end. Oops. So that's what we got going on. That's your new lecture. Please let me know if you have any questions. Again, all of you should have your papers back. And let me know if you have any additional help. Okay, know what's due and everything else. I'll be sending this out on before 9 a.m. on Monday. Thank you very much, and look for the next one on before 9 a.m. Friday.